Hello everybody and welcome back to the Hilltop Pillbox here in Abbotsford, British Columbia, Canada, and we got the board set up for a game of Historical Board Gaming's Global War 1939. In full disclosure, this is probably my favorite World War II game. It's a little more involved than Axis and Allies versions. But it doesn't quite have the depth and complexity of the 1936 series. That is a fabulous game in and of itself, of course. But I'm just a little bit more partial to this one. I think it's because I played this one first a few times. Some good friends, and we had a lot of good times rolling. And there's some fun political stuff that's kind of light politics. That's not too terribly... what's the word? Complicated, I guess. And so this is just a lot more just dice rolling and enjoying yourself, not worrying too much about little minor blunders that you make. I know in 36 there can be ramifications that will echo through, but with this game here, it's a little bit less stringent on the rules for politics. So. But I'm just going to take you on a little walk around the map here. I've done one visually while I've been blah blah blahing, but we'll take you on a bit of a walk around here. And yeah, there we go. Just make sure you get everything here. All right. So I guess we'll start with up here in Germany. Germany, of course, begins the game. 1939 this one is. So some nations aren't at war with each other or at war with anybody yet. And Germany then, on their first turn, has what's called a second impulse. So they're allowed to attack once and then attack again. And that usually takes care of most of the British fleet. And they capture Paris pretty quickly. If Paris has held, it has happened that Paris holds, but it's not too frequent that happens. And then we have, well, the second impulse, by the way, means they get to put their buy on and attack with it. They don't get a second buy. They don't get another bunch of money, though. That would be just OP. But they do get to put on typically a stack of tanks that they've just built and get to charge forward and go after Paris. So the Poles here are not in a good way. They will get attacked, and I think we've seen Warsaw hold once because, well, they're just lucky, I guess, in that one. But they don't have much stuff here compared to what the Germans can bring. But if the German player decides to bite off more than he can chew in the first impulse, sometimes he won't have things in a good position to be able to actually take Warsaw. Russia, of course, will stab Poland in the back here, thanks to Molotov-Ribbentrop from earlier that year, and they'll go into East Poland, but that's as far as they can go in the rules. Germany can take the other two. And then we have Finland, of course, is up there, and Finland is what's called a pro-axis minor. The pro-axis minors are Finland, Iraq, and of course Argentina, because there you have it. And the pro-allied minors are Brazil and Yugoslavia, and Greece, and Iran, and Siam is also a pro-axis. They're Japanese territory pretty quickly once the game gets going. Another nice thing about this one here is that the Communist Chinese are represented. They never ever get more than $3. Even if they capture more territories, all they can build is one guy per turn. So the nice thing is that they don't really get to be a huge growing concern for the Japanese, but they can take over Chinese territories. So the rules say that they only ever make $3, but they can eliminate nationalist Chinese money. So I'm not sure why you would do that, unless nationalist Chinese are doing really well, then the communists can try to slow them down. But they don't attack them per se, it's just if they liberate. So if Japan comes into Shenxi and takes it, the communists take over and they get the roundel, but they don't get the money. It's just an interesting little thing on the rules. Also, we have Novosibirsk up here. Novosibirsk is basically it's those factories that got moved, but it's just being done before the war starts, because there's a lot of territory up here, as you can see, a lot more than Global 40 has, and so they have to do the best they can to get over there and stop the Japanese. Now you see the Japanese have red troops here. These are veteran units, and they attack a little bit better, defend better. They've also got some fighters. They've got 5 fighters that attack, and this is a D12 system. So fighters typically attack at a 6 and defend at a 6, but they attack at an 8, these veterans. So it's pretty cool. What else is noteworthy? FEC, Far East Command, is really hurting. They've got a grand total of 6 guys on the board. 8. 3 plus 2 plus 2, and Buddy up in Hong Kong. Then they've got a destroyer and a transport and a very small fleet here. But they typically abandon Hong Kong. If Japan hasn't attacked Hong Kong in round 1, which they typically don't in this version, it's not really politically smart for them to do so. Typically they bugger out of Hong Kong. Which brings me to another point, is scorched earth. So at the end of your turn, or pardon me, at the beginning of your turn, you can scorched earth your factories or your air bases or your naval bases. Just get rid of them so that the enemy cannot use them. That's always fun. What else is interesting about this? The Dutch have a very good presence down here. They got a nice fleet here. So if as soon as Holland is taken by Germany, which is typically on round 1, but sometimes they leave it. They shouldn't, though, because then Holland gets all income of 18, which the UK gets to spend. So it's usually not a good idea for them to do. So they tend to go after that. But all those ships that we see over here, all those ships actually just end up becoming Allied ships, and they go to Anzac typically. Depends on what the political situation is. And so sometimes the Japanese will just come sink these things, so they don't have to put up with them. But you see the white armies that are all over the place? These are strict neutrals. The strict neutrals, many of them will have navies. And so what happens is when you attack them, once you've taken the capital, which is always denoted by a brighter roundel, you see the roundels for Italy or for Turkey here are very, very dark, except for the middle one. It's very pops. They what you do is you roll for the ships, and if you get a 1 or a 2, then you get that ship. Pardon me. And if you roll 3 to an 8, gets scuttled, and then a 9 to 12 or 9 to 10, something else happens, and a 10 to 11 or 11 and 12 gets scuttled. Maybe it's 3 to 10. Gets scuttled, and 11 at 12 the other team gets it. The reason I was kind of fumbling over that is that the French here, they have quite the fleet, as you can see. They're going to roll for those ships, and a 1 to a 2 makes them typically German, because Germany's going to be the ones taking Paris. And then a 3 to an 8, they get scuttled, and 9 to 10 they become Vichy, which means they go to a Vichy port, which I'll talk about in a second. And 11 and 12 means they become Allied ships, which is, that becomes a real problem for Germany, because then Germany ends up having to sink more money into Navy, which Germany really doesn't want to do. So what we got here is we've got, that's a Free French, and then we've got a Vichy marker. So we've got a bunch of these things. And what happens is you just go around and you roll a d12. Maybe I should have had a d12 out here. Let's grab a d12 here. I got a d12. So grab a d12 and you roll it. And if we were rolling for French Equatorial Africa, that becomes Vichy. And then you roll for the Congo, and it's an 8. So that would become Free French. And you do that for all the French territories. Now these ones here, this doesn't really mean much. This one doesn't mean much. This could, possibly. This has a buck to it, a buck, which is nice. And plus all the French Foreign Legion here, right? All the colonial type troops that are fighting for the French. They're nice. It's a nice looking unit, actually. I really like it. It's just a French sculpt, but it's on a French. And all this stuff is from historical board gaming. Syria is where the point. But you roll for all of these territories, and then you'll end up putting either a Free French roundel or a Vichy roundel. If you put a Free French, it means the Allies are able to land there. You can land your planes there, no problem. If it's Vichy, that means that the Axis have access to them. And so that's very important on a couple of rounds here. One is Syria. If Syria actually goes Vichy, this guy's got a skedaddle, and they allow him to retreat there. But it also means then that Italian and German planes that come over here and may want to mess around now have a landing spot that they didn't have, a second ago. So the Brits have to be very careful about that. Madagascar also, it's been known to have Japan, after it's taken Calcutta, which happens quite often in this game, coming down to Madagascar to bomb something and then land here because it has a Vichy marker on it. And the other thing that happens sometimes is that New Hebrides and Fiji, sometimes they cause grief. Now, in the rules, whatever you roll for both of them at the same time. So you only roll one die, and so they're either both Free French or they're both Vichy. But yeah, a lot of interesting things can happen. Of course, you got Saigon and French Indochina. Now, in the setup, these are empty. There's not supposed to be anything in there. We like to add a little bit of trouble for the Japanese. It's not much, but it's a little. And they take it anyway, but they might lose 1 or 2 units doing it, which we figure only fair. When you see Japan get rolling in this game, you'll understand why we did that. An interesting point in this game is it's 1939, remember, and so Italy won't be at war when it's Britain's turn. So Britain does go first. UK goes first before Italy. But unfortunately, they can't attack. They can't do a Taranto raid because they're not at war with Italy yet. Italy's at war with nobody. Now we know historically that Italy did declare war. Once, when Paris was taken, it was all over, but the ink was still wet. But they were declaring war then. But for game playability, they've said at HBG that they're not at war yet. The interesting happens is that when these things get rolled for, if they roll a 1 or a 2 on any of these ships, they become Axis ships, which means they become Italian because it's the closest Axis port. So that can cause 6 kinds of grief in the Mediterranean. Now, it can happen that they turn Allied, and if they turn Allied, they come over here to Gibraltar. And they could go Vichy, in which case they go to the closest Vichy port, which could be Marseille, it could be Tunisia, could be Normandy, right? Anywhere where there's a port, that's Vichy. It could be Rio de Oro. Off it goes. So, very interesting game that way, because every turn 1 is completely different. The other thing I want to talk about is up here in Norway and Denmark. So whoever owns Denmark, they close this to enemy ships. Subs can get through, but no surface vessels can get through. Planes cannot fly over strict neutrals. That's a very important point. So strict neutrals, of course, are all the countries that are white, so you can't just fly over stuff that's a strict neutral. But there's some big money up here for Germany if they can take Oslo and Narvik and hold them. I think they get an extra $5. That's obviously for their better positioning to attack here, and also for some of the iron ore, I guess, from Norway and coal and whatnot. And they were doing some heavy water there as well. I think that's pretty much it from the. That's vastly different from G40. Canada has its own economy. Um, so, yeah, I'm not sure if there's much else that's violently different. The Graf Spee is down here. That's not a mistake. It's down there, killing stuff. A neat opening move for the Graf Spee that happens probably, well, I'd say most games, is it goes here. And that's on its first turn, the first impulse. And if it can kill both of these destroyers, so it's a cruiser, so it attacks at a 6. So if it can hit a 6 before either of these hits a 4 or less, it'll sink all of those. And then on the second impulse, it'll come down here and sink the South African transport. And South Africa has its own economy as well, but it stays at 3. So Graf Spee can have some fun there and kind of hamstring. But it has happened too, where it comes over here, misses, gets sunk, and now the South Atlantic is wide open here. And you know, you start grabbing your Commonwealth guys over here, and you come here and activate Liberia. There's an extra buck for UK. You come over here, activate Brazil, tons of money. So that first battle that Germany has is actually quite important. Yeah. The convoy zones here are pretty self-explanatory. If you can get a warship in there, so not a transport, and it's there at the end of that country's turn. So if the Graf Spee came up here, did that, at the end of the round, Britain would lose 2 if that was still there after Britain's turn. But I'm pretty sure they'd sink it with all that stuff. So, I think that's pretty much it. The minor allies, I guess, you activate these at the end of your turn with a non-combat. And Germany is able to activate Hungary and Romania on the first turn because, of course, it has a second impulse. And then Bulgaria on the third turn. They can't attack Yugoslavia until Romania has been taken. And they can't attack Greece until Bulgaria has been taken. So, should England actually survive down here, their navy, sometimes they hustle stuff up to Greece and activate it for the extra couple of bucks and try to hang on to it. So, but yeah, it's a great game. Love it, and hoping that we can get the game in pretty soon here. And well, I guess as you're watching this, if you're watching this, it means that the game's about to start. So we hope you enjoy it. All right, here comes the Wehrmacht. Well, I gotta tell you, what a first round. And if you're a fan of the, I guess it's a classic movie now, The Fugitive with Tommy Lee Jones and Harrison Ford. The line that Tommy Lee Jones gives when they find the big train wreck, he goes, my, what a mess. Well, here you go. This is the first round's Deadpool. And that's pretty impressive. Well over 100 units died. And we're going to show you kind of what happened as we go around here. We've got the German Navy really busted out. And Germany spent 15 bucks on 3 subs. They only cost 5 bucks for U-boats. And if they attack in pairs or more, so 2 or more subs at the same time, they attack at a 5. This is on a D12 system, by the way. And so they're just ruthless. So it's they've swept the Royal Navy from the sea, and the Royal Navy scampered off too. We'll show you where they went. The Luftwaffe, Luftflotte, I think that's Luftflotte 5 in Norway. Somebody can correct me on that in the comments. Finland has been activated, and so the Germans actually get +3 for those territories there. They also activated Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria. They were able to take Poland, although they took some decent losses, not horrible. Big story is that Paris fell, but just with 1 mech left because, well, rolling. And so you see that there's a British roundel here with what appears to be a French troop. Well, I'll tell you what happens. So after Paris falls, we roll our dice, as you know, to find out if territories will go Vichy, which you can see these two did, or Free French, which, you know, Morocco did here. So Free French belongs to the UK, and they move and attack, no problem. The Vichy belong to the Axis. They draw their income from that, and they don't attack. They simply defend. And then you do the same thing with all the ships. And so pretty much all the ships either got scuttled, There was a Free French cruiser here, and a Vichy French cruiser. There was a Free French transport, which the Italians sunk, but it was pretty much everything was sunk. And the British, mourning the loss of the Royal Navy, skedaddled down south. So they moved down here. The fleet that was left, there was a couple of ships here, so they went 1, 2, down to here to 3. The Graf Spee attack on the 2 destroyers here failed, so they've come up here. There were 3 ships here in the port, and they came actually all the way over to Brazil to help out the Canadians, who actually took Boa Vista. Boa Vista? Boa Vista, I think it's Boa Vista. It's Portuguese. And so we got the remains of the Royal Navy down here, but for lack of a better term, they are hurting for certain. The Canadians saved their money this round. They didn't spend any the first round, so they saved their $10, and then they collected 14, so they got $24 to spend next round. America built everything here, and everything amounted to $20 worth, because that's what they start the game with. And then they go up. We're going to talk about the money a little bit, because there's something pretty fascinating that happened. See the big American fleets here? That is all from the Pacific. They have emptied out the Pacific, and we'll head over there and show you that in a second. The Italians struck hard here. Italy seems to do well at my house. They were able to take Marseille back, because the Free French had taken Marseille, which was UK, and then they moved up into Rheims, and they took that just with the infantry, and then Marseille was wide open, and that was that. What else can be said here? So the Italians, they built a factory here down in Tobruk, and they had to sink a destroyer here, and then they had to sink the Greek Navy plus a British transport there, which they did, but it cost them a couple of destroyers and a sub, I believe, and this cost them a sub. So the Royal Navy bloodied the Italians, to be sure. The British have this left, so they got a couple capital ships and a cruiser, so nothing to sneeze at, but they're probably going to skedaddle out of harm's way through the Suez. The British have made a bold move here, because the Italians, as you can see, they start with 4 units. There's 4 infantry they have. That's all they have in Africa, and everything else you have to bring down your air power if you want to hold it. Or use your transports, but then you can't take Greece. And the British knew that, so they moved everything up before the Italian turn to force their hand a little bit. The rest of the Italians stayed home. South Africa brought its transport up here, and Anzac moved up. South Africa built its lone man. That's all it can build each round. Even if it takes territory, it just goes to the UK. Over here in Far East Command, not much money. Just got a minor factory. It can build up to 6 units, but the first 3 must be infantry. But they don't have much money anyway to start the game. They start with $16. Their economy, I think, is 23, but they'll start with a little less because they're not in a war footing. And so they grabbed from over here. They came up, grabbed a couple of guys, and they're in Bombay. Obviously, they're going to be heading over to get Iran activated and get some more cash for Far East Command, because Far East Command is going to be hurting for certain soon. You may have also noticed, we'll just zoom in over here, Holland remains. And because Holland remains, Holland's territories are worth $18, and they haven't been attacked by anybody yet. So that $18 went to the UK on the first round at the end of the round. They didn't get to spend it this round, but they'll get to spend it next round because they're considered an active allied power. Now the reason for that is because Germany sent a ton of stuff towards Poland, as you can see, so they might start the war a little earlier than normal. We'll see what the German players decide to do, and because they've got all the miners activated here. Greece is already taken care of. They just got to silence Yugoslavia, and the Soviets, they don't have much at all. We'll talk about their economy shortly as well. Over here, we'll look at the communist Chinese have retreated and they planted their one guy. Again, communist China, they can't attack Japan until Russia is at war with Japan, which they are not. So communist China is very much a puppet of the Soviet Union. Communist China can go into nationalist China, not as an attack, but just to maybe bolster the defense. But when it does, the territories become communist Chinese and they never revert back to nationalist. Unless they're taken by Japan and then the nationalists take it back, then they can. But if the communists, say, come into here and then they leave and it remains communist and the nationalists move in, it doesn't revert back to nationalist incomes. So you got to be kind of careful because you're both fighting the Japanese and pennies count over here. But the Japanese, as you can see, came in and just thumped the Chinese, killed everything. But they took some hits. In fact, they lost a veteran fighter and they lost 1 or 2 veteran troops in this battling that they were doing up and down the coast. They didn't try for French Indochina, they just didn't have the resources to go everywhere. And there were some sizable Chinese forces here they had to get rid of. But as you can see, they're down to scant amount of units. But they do have their decent air force. And they're always a threat, and the Navy to move everything around. But they're not at war with Britain yet, or the Soviet Union. They're only at war with China. Attacking the Saigon stuff is a house rule that we just say it has nothing really to do with the UK and all them. It only has, it's down here, it's just basically Japan doing its imperialist push. We put a little bit of historical accuracy on this part of it here. Everything else we kind of let go for the rules. But that we figure Britain really wasn't interested in this area at all. It was the French, to a lesser extent the Dutch, and yeah, so when Japan came down there, there really wasn't a lot of pushback from Great Britain. Great Britain was, of course, worried more about Singapore and Burma than they were about over here. So we decided, just as a group, to say, you know what, if Japan attacks Saigon, it's not going to affect their stance, their peace with the UK, which is going to be absolutely gone by the end of probably next round anyway. So not a huge deal, and it's not like the Brits can do anything to them anyway. So everybody just kind of agreed on that. This part of the Japanese fleet did nothing during the turn, so they decided to come out here and just sit in the middle of the ocean. They can get to Hawaii from there, but they have no transports. They can get down to the Carolines, and from there, obviously, do some fun stuff. Little mini fleet here, 3 subs and a destroyer. Got 4 destroyers up there, a couple destroyers and a sub. You can see that the Japanese have a decent fleet to start with because their economy is quite lacking. The Anzac decided to save their money. They just picked up the lone guy from New Zealand and brought him back. But an interesting thing happened because Holland, which usually gets attacked, was not attacked. It's just considered a full Allied power, and these islands here don't need to be activated. They're actually producing money, and Britain just takes the money. Now, had Holland been attacked, all of these now are colonial. They're not producing any money for anybody unless you take them. And so New Zealand didn't have to take this because the Dutch are considered an Allied power, so New Zealand actually got a $5 bonus because Holland wasn't attacked. Go figure. Crazy, crazy. All right, we're going to talk about the money here. Oh, everybody, just want to let you know about the economy here. And after round 1, the Axis have 163. Now that's every dollar that they collected. So that's all of their bonuses. That's the 10 that they got from France for taking over France. And then the Allies, they have 158. Now that includes Holland's 18, which is definitely going to disappear this round. So, yeah, the Axis definitely have the upper hand in men and material as well as an economy now. Also, we can see that the Allied economy is quite fractious, right? Like it's all over the place. Whereas with the Axis, you essentially have three big ones, and then you got your minors in Europe. So looks like the Axis have things pretty well in hand after round one. Kind of where they always are, though. Not a lot of huge surprises. We'll see what round two brings in just a moment. All right, well, round two is in the books, and it was a kinder, gentler war. On land, anyway. Lots and lots and lots of navies got beat up this round. So we're just gonna go along here, not so much chronologically as just geographically. So the Americans have again brought everything over to the Atlantic. They built a couple of destroyers here, and brought all the other ones up there. Canada has been busy. I'd say a busy beaver, but that's a little too on the nose, I think. But anyway, yeah, they built 3 destroyers because they didn't build anything the first round, so they had 25 or 23 bucks to spend. Yeah, 24. Anyway, they only needed 21, so they built 3 destroyers there because of the U-boat menace that you can see here. Over the graveyard here and down to Brazil. Canadians came down and liberated Brazil and took those ones there and left this one for the British coming over from Liberia. So when they did that, they were able to scoop up these nice naval units here that are all purple here and majestic and whatnot. And so now Argentina, which is a pro-Axis, you can see underneath here, minor Axis, they got a free infantry this round because they haven't been activated yet. So every 2 rounds, any pro-Axis or pro-Allied countries get a free infantry if their capitals have not been activated yet. So that happened in a couple other places. We'll point those out. Up here at the top, the German High Seas Fleet retreated to here, but their Untersee Fleet, I don't think that's a real word, but the Untersee boats came over here, and the whole stack of them went right here, knowing that the British had no destroyers within reach. They just sit there with impunity. Now, they're not convoying like they can in 40 or even some of the other versions because there's no convoy zone. Canadian convoy zone here, obviously, and then some pretty hefty British ones down here. That those U-boats are probably licking their chops. But as you can see, there are no more fighters left in England because they did that big attack there and they sank the High Seas Fleet, but they lost all their fighters doing it, which was 5 or 6 Spitfires, 5 I think. Went down in flames, but knowing that the Germans now no longer have a fleet and can nary afford to build one, that put a lot of minds at ease. The German player made a miscalculation and planted all these planes here, ostensibly for some sort of an assault, possibly in Leningrad next round, but then they couldn't scramble because they weren't in Western Germany. So that might have been a little faux pas, as the French would say. In North Africa here, the French Foreign Legion got her done. They came into Tripoli. They killed one fellow there, one Italian, and took that over and lost no one doing it. Oh, actually, they did. They did lose a single free Frenchman who had come down from Marseille last turn. So he died, but the French Foreign Legion is alive and well. The Italians then had to answer by bringing down a bunch of stuff from Greece. And as you can see, there's no British ships anywhere to be seen. The British fleet attacked the Italian battleship, cruiser, and sub and sank them all. They lost their carrier during at the end of the battle. They took it as a final loss. And then the Italians came in and mopped up. There's a British battleship and a cruiser were left, and they sank both of them for the loss of a submarine. I think that was it. So yeah, I think it was pretty bad rolling on the Brits' part, but they were all sunk. Everything was sunk in one turn because they used their whole air force. So everything was sunk in one turn. The British only had 2 dice back, a 6 and an 8, and they missed on the 6, but they hit on the 8. So they only sank a sub. Um, oh, actually, what it was there's no destroyer, and there were two Italian subs, and they got a hit and sank the cruiser, and then the battleship got a hit on the reply. That's what it was. So the cruiser was gone anyway. And the British have kind of spread things out a little bit here. And, oh, the Italian build did not go on. You want me to put the, okay, I'm going to put the Italian build on here. You wanted all these here, of course. Got to protect your shiny new transports. Then we're going to put a man in Rome. And then we're going to put an armor there in Tobruk. And then a couple of these bad boys. These are Bersaglieri. I don't know if I'm saying that right. They cost 4. And they can build as many as they want in a turn. But they attack at a +1 when paired with armor. So, hence, got a couple of armor here. Got a couple of Bersaglieri. And so they're hoping to get that done. So, now they have a port here. So, you can go... Go 1, 2, pick them up, and then 3. But doesn't look like they'll be able to make an attack this next round, unless they want to come and take Corinth, which of course they could do, scoop up some points. But the Italians did get their bonus, their +5 for no Allied ships. This is a Vichy cruiser, so it is not Allied to be sure. In this version, whoever holds Gibraltar will close the Med to surface vessels of any kind, so the Brits can come and go as they please, but Vichy wouldn't move anyway, because the Vichy units don't move, they just defend. But the Italians can't get out. Submarines can get out, but not that. And of course, the British, having brought their whole fleet down here, and the Canadians coming down here, got a sizable force here. Not a lot of punch to it, but they can certainly soak up a lot of hits. Over here, everybody's activated now, but because Germany hasn't declared war on Russia yet, I'm sure that's coming momentarily, nobody can attack Yugoslavia. So once that happens, I'm sure a bunch of these troops will come and attack Yugoslavia. The Soviets just built a few guys up here in Karelia. Leningrad in this version does not have a factory. You can build one there, I think, if you want, but you cannot. You don't start with one. So that makes things a little different, because now you have a factory in a non-victory point area and a victory point area, victory point city, without a factory. So you have to build it and move it and build it and move it and build it and move it. So now the fun thing about this game is, despite the Molotov-Ribbentrop deal, the Germans and the Finns can attack the Russians on Finnish soil, and the Finns can make spoiling attacks against the Russians, of course, without precipitating a war. And the Russians can go whole hog into Finland if they want, and it doesn't precipitate a war or change anything in the game because of that. So it's kind of fun. You can have a little border clash. It's kind of like in Global War 36 with China and the Soviet Union kind of beating each other up on the border. Here we have the Soviets from Novosibirsk. They're headed west, so that's done. The Brits activated southern Iran, but haven't gotten to the capital yet, so Tehran got an extra man, and so did the Iraqis. They got an extra man there, so we'll see how that goes next round. Calcutta just built 6 infantry this round, and the fortification. Now the fortification, if you're not familiar, you can build up to 2 per territory, and each one can house 10 infantry. And when the battle starts, you get 2 d5s for the fort for the first round, that's it. And all of the infantry, instead of defending at a 4, remember this is on a d12, instead of defending at a 4, they defend at a 5 for the first round. And each of these can hold up to 10 infantry. So once Calcutta gets to 20 infantry, then the forts no longer help out with that. Japan did not encroach any further into China for obvious reasons until they're able to gird up their loins a bit here and get a few more units on the ground. And we'll see what happens there. Communist Chinese remain back, not going anywhere. the Japanese took French Indochina and Saigon. Not without trouble, but they also activated Siam, so that's an extra $3. Plus Siam will be at the end of next turn, getting 1 free infantry each round. They cannot increase their economy, but they can certainly be a bit of a thorn in the side of the FEC. The Japanese fleet kind of wholesale came south here, and they're all in the Carolines. Carolines, of course, has a naval base as well as an air base. And so from their naval base, they are able to get to Hawaii and also cause a little bit of grief. They can get to Australia, but not down to Sydney. And you're saying, whoa, what happened here? Well, you remember that nice Dutch fleet that was here? Well, once Holland got taken by the Germans, this instantly was turned into the nearest Allied territory fleet, and of course the nearest territory is there. And so they all came down here. They came here first, and then everything moved down here. So Anzac can't build capital ships, unfortunately, but they were able to snag the battleship there. And they've got 3 subs, 4 destroyers, 3 cruisers, and another coastal sub. Coastal in this game just means what it sounds like. You can't go anywhere without having a coast line next to you, so you can't venture off into the wild blue yonder if you want to. Now, most of these territories have islands, but like this one does not, and this one does not. So there's a little bit of moments of pause to figure things out. I forgot to mention FEC was able to grab these now that the Dutch are in the war. They've been, Holland's gone, so these are all up for grabs now. So now Japan has got some problems because all of these countries around here are getting richer. And let's talk about the money for a second. Here we have the board. It's all been adjusted for round 2. So let's look at the Axis first here. So the Germans, they have their $53. They get an extra 10 for their NOs, and Japan gets $52, but no extras. Italy, it's got 30, which is 1 less than last round because they lost Tripoli. But they get their +5 because of no Allied ships, so they actually get a bit more. And the Axis miners crank out $10 for the that all that money goes to the Germans. And then they also get their own economy. I'll talk about that in a second if you're not familiar with it. You'll learn a little bit. And then, so the 147 is the base, and then the 15 bonus turns into 162. Speaking of the Ally, or the Axis miners here, so these fellas here, you see the red squares that show the red square. I didn't even mean to say that, but they're headed for a red square, but the little red squares obviously are the economies. That's what they actually give to the Germans. Bulgaria, though, actually produces $4 a turn for herself, and that's why she now has an extra artillery. Romania produces $6, that's why you see a tank, and Hungary is $3, $3. Okay, doesn't change. Okay, so although these produce an extra 12, including the 3 from Finland, produces a little bit more for themselves. So we have the 6 and the 3 and the 4. So they actually make 13 down here, 16 total. So it's pretty nice, but Germany definitely is going to need it. And most of these territories they're going to take for the first little while are either worth 1. There's a couple of 2s in there. But it's pretty tough slugging. Their economy doesn't soar in this game. That's the one thing about Germany. The economy does not go flying off the handle like it does in some games because everything is pretty chintzy out there. Alright, I think that's pretty much it. Not much else happened. Like I say, a kinder, gentler round 2, except if you were a boat or an aircraft perhaps, or the Dutch. They finally got in the war. And I guess we'll see what everybody decides to do on round 3. Well, the war here has contracted a little bit, and not as many deaths as you can see. I think we were around 30 or something like that for this round, so that's not quite so bad. But things have taken a bit of a turn here. First of all, we'll just go over to the States and we'll see that they brought everything up here. And you can see there's no aircraft. So we're going to find out what happened to them in just a second. Down here in good old South America, those pesky Canucks have come all the way south and have actually now invaded Argentina. What's up with that? So Argentina is now under threat. Only have men attacking, but only have men defending. The Argentinian fleet was wiped out by the combined UK-Canadian fleet. And the only hit was on the Canadian coastal battleship, which they had procured from the generous Brazilians. So that was muy bon. I think I said that right in Portuguese. Had some Portuguese students in my class, so I think that muy bon, I think is how you say it. But yeah, so Argentina's in trouble. By the way, this is a first for us. We've never ever seen Canada go into Argentina. They've come into Brazil, but usually stop and turn and head up to Europe. But this time there's too many U-boats floating around, so they figured they might as well have a bit of a sortie there in South America. Over here in Africa, things are heating up. The Free French, of course, the Foreign Legion went in their last turn and didn't really do anything this turn. Libya is not worth anything in this map, so they didn't bother thinning themselves out. The Italians have brought down 4 transports full of things, and they also built 3 artillery here, so they got quite the force. They also built a carrier this turn, threw a couple of planes on it just for safety. I don't think anything can get to them, but it's always good to have safety there. They brought their sub up here to sink the destroyer with the help of the aircraft and the bomber, but the destroyer did not get a hit. That was the Yugoslav destroyer. Did not get a hit. Not much else going on up here except that the Germans attacked the Canadian destroyer fleet. There were 3 destroyers, and the Germans attacked with 6 U-boats. And on the first round, all 3 Canadian destroyers got hits. So they sank 3 U-boats. The U-boats only had 2 hits, or 1 hit on that round actually, even though they're shooting it better at a 5. But the second round they got the last 2 hits they needed, and the Canadians got 1 hit. So 4 U-boats for 3 destroyers. It's $28, or pardon me, $21 for the Canadians, and $20 for the Germans. So the Kriegsmarine came out a little ahead on that one, but they've got problems over here because they decided to, of course, get involved in a land war in Asia, which is the biggest blunder. But hey, we'll see how they do. They took East Poland. The Finns, this is an interesting story. The Finns came up and they actually took Karelia, which reduced the major factory down to a minor. Well, you don't want the Germans having a factory on Russian soil, so the Soviets attacked, took Karelia back, and yeah, lots of death on that one for both sides. But no more factory, because every time you hit a factory, it reduces. So a major becomes a minor, and a minor becomes a big hole in the ground. So you can see that the Russians do have a healthy air force sitting in Leningrad, and they took Pskov, which is right there. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's spelled like Pskov, but I think it's pronounced Pskov, but I could be wrong. And yeah, there's that. You can see there's a Russian destroyer and a Finnish destroyer, and they haven't decided to tangle yet because the other side can scramble their planes, and yeah, it's just not worth it. Those 2 ships aren't really going to do much. The Soviet Northern Fleet is standing pat right now because the Germans have this big conflagration of aircraft that can reach out and touch someone in a real and personal way. So the Romanians came into western Ukraine. The Bulgarians and the Hungarians went into Yugoslavia. Just a big mess all around. Soviets continued to bring things over to Moscow. They finally built some guards units, which attack and defend better on homeland by 1. But outside of the homeland, they don't do any better. And you can build 2 a turn, and they still only cost $3. So I don't know why Russia wasn't cranking those out earlier on, but there you go. The UK, the Far East Command over here, decided to take all of Iran and got $3 for it and a couple of free infantry, so that's handy. And they're probably going to try to put the boots to the axis here in Iraq and then take out the Vichy regiment in Syria. But we'll see how that goes. With the Italians lurking by with enough firepower to destroy anything that heads over to the coast, have to be a little cautious there. The other thing is that South Africa and New Zealand had a joint attack here. This one down here was just 3 infantry versus 1 infantry, and they won and didn't take a hit. And then the other one here, of course, was just 2 on 1, but they had air power that came down and helped out. And again, the Italians shot blanks on that one. Their tank did blitz through Lower Egypt to grab that. Not sure if the British are gonna take it back or if they're gonna try to turtle a little bit, but we'll see. Over in Calcutta, you'll see that some more men were built and an air force has sprung up. So the Far East Command built 2 of them, and UK England over there, they actually built one of the fighters. They can build 2 units here. They can build 2 in Sydney. They can build 2 in Canada and 1 in South Africa. So if they're able to kind of spread the wealth a little bit. So they decided to help out with a fighter. So now this is too tough for Japan to crack anytime soon. And Japan's got severe problems over here with the Chinese. Chinese had built 3 artillery this turn and still had $1 left over. And the Japanese didn't push any closer in for obvious reasons. Anybody that goes in there is going to die at this time. So unfortunately, the Chinese are making enough to build 4 infantry or 3 artillery per round. So the Japanese are going to have to do something. They have built some speedy units, and in this version, mechanized infantry can tag or tow along an artillery unit. So that can happen. We'll see how that goes. I think Japan forgot to move its infantry. Yeah, I think he forgot to move the infantry, so we'll probably let him move his infantry there. I got some new players, so I want to make sure people enjoy themselves, and little mental lapses, are not fun. The factory in Saigon here is being protected by some veteran troops. Now, looking at this, you say, well, why would you bother putting troops down there? Well, we did have some FEC transports. They decided to come down here after all. But they were sitting here and here. And with this fleet here, they probably could have taken that out and then landed and taken the factory, because there was nothing on the factory because it was just built. And that would be a real setback because it would just disappear for the Japanese. Plus now they have to turn around and take Saigon. And so Japan decided not to leave that to chance. Now, because they did that, they also hold on to their sneak attack. Japan gets 1 sneak attack that they can use where they can attack, do a full round of attack, and then even the units that were in the attack can do a non-combat movement. So that's pretty nasty stuff. So for instance, they could bring these ships to here, kill them, and then anybody who's left over could sail over here and could they get there? Well, they can't get to that one. But they could, sail on further, maybe blockade over here. They could bring units, do a landing here, and anybody that survives can get back on and do another non-com move and put themselves in a situation to do some more damage. So they can only do that once. They have to use that sneak attack against obviously somebody they're not at war with, and they have to use it by turn 7. So I've never seen Japan not use it. Usually by turn 5, they're well and truly at war. Speaking of the rest of the Japanese fleet, it's a good force of destroyers and subs here. It's got 4 of each. And then there's 3 destroyers down here. Now what are they doing down there? Well, there's this fleet here. Anzac decided to build a fighter this round, and then they saved $5, so they got 20 for next round. I think this might have been trying to tease the Anzac into an attack, because again, if they do that, when Japan attacks them, that brings US into the war faster. It adds 25 to their count, which would put them within one decent die roll of being in the war. And so these folks need the States in the fight as soon as possible. So if they attack Japan first, it takes away Japan's sneak attack on them, doesn't remove it from the ones on the Americans, and now Japan can attack with impunity all over the place here with their good Air Force and crazy big Navy. So probably a good idea not to, because they're sitting right here with 2 battle wagons, 2 cruisers, 2 loaded carriers, as well as 3 loaded transports with some Marines, essentially, the Special Naval Landing Force there. If we look here, we see that the Americans, they only had 1 guy in San Francisco at the start of their turn, so they moved men and artillery down from the western U.S. They flew in planes from the carriers over in the Atlantic, and they flew in guys from Washington, and then they built 3 fighters. So you never know, the Japanese might try to take it. If they could take San Francisco, which I've seen, it is not easy for America to take San Francisco back. It takes at least 3 rounds, if not more, for them to take it back. Now, on the plus side, I think I'll mention this now, is that the Americans, you can see it's a major factory. It's only really a minor. I just didn't feel like putting out a major or putting out a minor and having to switch them out. America can only build 9 units a turn right now. They're not making that much money, but they can only build in 3 spots. And so when they go to war, these instantly transform into major factories, and they can build up to 10 units out of each. So it's a minor right now. So if Japan takes it, the factory actually disappears. And then America is down to building on 2 sites. Granted, they can build 20 units, but they are 4 or 5 spaces away from the east. So it takes quite a while. So it's not really a bad idea for Japan to do this. Automatically brings U.S. into the war, of course. But never know. But the Russians are now in the war with Japan. The Japanese went up to Amur and killed it. Only lost 1 guy doing it. And Vladivostok is now ripe for the taking. And you can see the coastal gun there. Totally useless versus ground assault. So the Russians, not really sure why they didn't go into Manchuria there. But maybe they just want to make it somewhat tough. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe we'll see. That's pretty much it. We're going to show you the money here, and I'll have to get on with round 4. So here we are. Here's the money board, and so as we look up here, we can see that the Germans and the Japanese are pretty close, but the Germans have that little bonus, puts them over 60. Italians took a little bit of a hit, losing some of the Horn of Africa there. The miners get 15. I think before we had written 12, but that's what Germany gets from them, which is included in the 58. The Axis miners actually produce $15 overall. So if you total that all up, it's $165. The Allies, on the other hand, are making a ton of money. You'll see down here for Canada, making pretty good scratch, $17, but you also see the 3 in brackets. They're being convoyed for 3. So this 3 in the 3 Canada gets for having all the British territory, which is now gone thanks to Italy. They cancel each other out. So we just added up all the other 5 bonuses, the four 5s for 20. So 227 for the Allies. So it's starting to widen, as it always does. The gap always widens in this game to start with. It's kind of like an accordion. But as the Axis start to push further into Allied lands, and Japan gets on the horse a little bit and starts going, they'll be able to bring more and more dough back home, and the Allies will have less. If the Axis ever get ahead of the Allies overall, that's usually game over. Especially because America's just going up now. So Russia's in the game, but they're down 3. They have 48 as their base, but they're down 3 because of the territories they've lost. They're down. Actually, they're down 4 now, so that should be 44. Thanks to Japan. But the Americans have 46. You see, they roll a 13 on round 1, a 14 on round 2, and then they roll a 4 this round. So they're only at 46. So they need Japan to attack UK or Anzac, because that'll add 25 to their count. And if Japan does that, that'll put America 25 up, which obviously will put it at 71. And it needs to get to 80. Once it gets to 80, then America's in the war. So I think we got another couple of rounds where America will not be able to do anything. And I think that the Japanese are happy with that. And they're going to probably try to go after China a bit harder the next round here. And probably silence the Soviets for good in the East. But time will tell. Who knows what these players are thinking here. And we'll show you what happens on round 4 in just a moment. I just was asked to do something about the technology. So we have this great technology chart made by Rob Poole, one of my subs. He did this great job. He did this on his phone, which blows me away. But the Germans here, they've attempted and they failed at a tech roll, but we keep the tech there. Now the rules they have in the book, we've changed a little bit. We've kind of made them a bit more like 1940, a little bit more like Anniversary as well, where you have you buy a tech for $5 or buy a roll for $5, and you roll and you need 11 or 12. If you get it, you get the tech, and if you don't, you can hang on to that, and each turn you get a roll. So the Germans will try again this time to get a tech, and it'll be interesting to see what they get. The other thing I was asked to mention is that we hadn't put on the minor powers stuff. So the Finns got an extra man, the Hungarians got a man, Romanians got a tank because they make $6, and the Bulgarians there, they get $4. So we give them an artillery. All right, so we'd add that up. Okay, we'll see you in a moment. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hilltop, I'd say, top hits radio station. I don't know, but here's an oldie. You ain't seen nothing yet by BTO here up in Canada. It's a classic up here. I don't know if too many people know it outside of Canada, but I think they did play it on The Simpsons once. But the hits do keep on coming in a big, huge way. Well, let's take a look here. Well, the American Navy is making steam, as they say, heading west. And you know what? Let's just jump to the end here. They're heading west because this happened. Yes, it's true. Japanese got in there. They used their sneak attack on San Fran to devastating effect, and their 6 units and their 4 planes were able to take out 10 units and the anti-aircraft. So they started with 3 bombards, which hit. They had 4, but 3 of them hit, and then it just kept rolling from there. Because on the first round, as you know, in the sneak attack, the defender can't shoot back. So it's basically 2 full rounds of assaulting the Americans before they were able to respond, and by then it was too late. They fought bravely, of course, as they took everything out that the Japanese had except for 1 Marine, but it just wasn't enough. Now what does that mean? Well, it means a couple of things. Oh, and the little sideshow up here, they took Alaska. A little sideshow here, Alaska is very important as well, though, but what does this all mean? Well, it means that America is down $9 to start, but they also lose their bonus of 20. Eep. So this is costing them, just taking San Fran cost $28. Plus, you'll notice it's a minor factory, and that's a little bit of a misnomer because it was a minor factory. It's actually gone. I just wanted you to see the visual there. So, I think misnomer was the wrong word, but it's late at night. So, so the Japanese player went in there, took it. And so now the Americans are marshaling everything up that they can, and they're building a bunch of ground units to head over there and take care of it. Now the Japanese can't build anything there, but they do have some transports already built and ready to go, trying to bring more stuff over. So Americans will take it back, but they're going to be out of the war and not get their bonus for a couple of rounds. It's probably going to cost them $60 to $80. So that's pretty nasty. We're going to show you the board in just a minute. Again, there's the dead. Canadians ended up actually taking the Argentinian capital here. I don't think that's really the capital, but that's what they make the one to be, I guess, just so it's harder to get to than that. And as you know, the Canadians built a port here, so these transports, which are going to be able to load up in a minute, well, 2 turns, I guess, are going to be heading up there. The rest of the Canadian ships came up here. This one's going to get repaired next turn. Can only repair at a port, and it wasn't at the port down here, it was down here. So the British moved a fleet into here, which caused no end of grief for the Italians because they're going to lose their bonus now. The Germans retreated way up north. They're under the ice pack, basically, as the Canadians built some destroyers when they saw them hightail it. And the British have the destroyer fleet there as well. So I think the German Kriegsmarine is about to go the way of the dodo, which gives the British an NO of $5 for getting rid of the U-boat fleet. So that's kind of worth it for them. Italians built some guys at home, and I know right now you're wondering, where's that shiny new aircraft carrier and fighters? Well, if you look up in London, you'll also see that all 4 Bomber Command bombers are gone. Well, they came down here and they sank it and killed the fighters, and 1 bomber actually landed here with all the French Foreign Legion, which, as you can see, no longer exists. 1 lone dude over here. So it's, yeah, the Italians not looking as good in the water, but they're looking a little stronger on land, until we look over here and see the British have built a sizable force here, and it's highly unlikely the Italians will be able to dislodge them, as the British have no natural enemies back home, so they're able to pour money into this minor factory. Now, something I wanted to tell you is that with the charts, things cost different money and attack at different values. So every country is just a little bit different, and that's an important thing to note, because you could say, well, you know, Italy's got a pretty healthy economy, but then you see how much stuff costs for Italy, and it's not that great. So speaking of Italy, you know, we're down here and we see the armor. If you see the armor right in the middle, I don't know if it's blurry or not, it's 7. And then you see it only attacks at a 5. Defends at a 6, but only attacks at a 5. Has a 6 if it gets a tactical bomber. Okay, so it's $7 for Italy to build a tank, whereas the Americans here, you can see the armor only costs $6. UK Commonwealth, same thing. Their armor costs $7. It at least attacks at a 6, so it might be worth it to build. And the submarines, submarine for the British is not a good buy. I don't know if you can read that, but it's $8. Whereas the Germans can build them for 5, and they attack at a 5 if there's 2 or more. So these are things you all have to take into account when you're building in this version, and I think it's great because it really does really makes you consider certain things. Yeah, so Africa's looking like it could end up being just a big old stalemate here. Don't see either side getting an upper hand. The British, of course, can't build any more factories around here, so they can only bring 3 things in at a time, whereas the Italians can ostensibly bring in more if they can keep those guys out of the Med. But with those guys coming, and if America can shake the Japanese here, and even the British destroyers up there, could become pretty problematic for the Italians. That's usually what happens in all these versions of the games, is if they can keep the Med free of Allied ships, they do well. But as soon as the Allies get in there, it's pretty much game over. On the Eastern Front, all is not quiet, as we know. The Germans have punched through already with the help... Oh, we forgot to take off the dead Russian. With the help of the Romanians, have been able to punch through into eastern Ukraine. They took Kiev and all these places without much fighting, because the Soviets last turn had retreated out of pretty much everything, just leaving one guy back to stop the Blitz, which now can happen. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Over here on the eastern flank as well, we have a big stack of men and tanks. Yeah, I don't know if the Soviets have enough to stop it. I think they're in big trouble. The Russians were able to take back Karelia, but that's a mess. You see the fighters and the bombers up there. They've got a whole bunch of fighters. The Russian destroyer is gone, as you can see, but they didn't scramble because it's not worth losing fighters over a destroyer. But things are looking pretty bad for the Allies all around here. Might have to call this one sooner than expected unless the Allies can figure a way to get out of this. The British are doing pretty well. They're handling their own in Africa, and pretty soon they'll start building transports and bringing guys over. But until that time, things are looking pretty good, and the Germans now are building their Tiger tanks. You can see the sculpt there. It's a gorgeous sculpt, and it's yeah, it costs $7, so it's $1 more, but it attacks at a 9. Thank you very much. And it can move too, but it can't blitz, so that's it hampers it a little bit. As you know, the Tigers were pretty prone to breakdowns, and it was tough to keep them rolling forward compared to the Panzer IVs or even the Panthers. So, yeah, not much else to say here. The Japanese actually took the communist China territory there, and well, they weren't going to stand for that. They just took it with one mech, so the communists came and took it without taking any casualties, and built their guy there. Pretty much it. Oh, right, the British fleet down here. Yeah, it's gone. Japanese attacked it and suffered one hit and peeled off the submarine. Both of the transports, of course, were sunk by the Japanese subs coming from the Carolines. You know, 1, 2, 3, easy peasy. And then they took Borneo as well. The Anzac are here. They are really, they're scared, and rightfully so. They could come out, but to what end? So FEC is being convoyed for 2. The Americans are being convoyed for 5 and 5, so $10. So we're going to go look at the board now, and we'll show you what all that means. Alright, so as we look here, the Germans are up to 67 as the base. The Japanese have surpassed them with 71. Of course, that's the San Francisco play. Italians are down a little bit, but all totaled 187, a little higher than last time. And over here, the Russians are way down. They start at 48. They're down to 34. We haven't been putting the commies on, so we went back and added $3 to each round because we forgot the commies. They're so, you know, small, but, you know, they try. The Americans, typically their base is at 80, but of course they're down 9 for Alaska and San Fran. Nationalist Chinese remain at 8, plus their bonus. The Burma Road is actually taken by Siam and some Japanese ground troops and planes and whatnot, but then the British took it back. Anzac remains. FEC's pretty healthy, but they're going to start to lose that. I'm not sure if we updated them actually. Yeah, we did. They're down a little bit. They took Iraq, but they lost Borneo. So Canada's up, of course, 1, and there you go. So it's 233 to 187 here at the end of round 4. So as we look at this, see that everybody's economy has gotten larger from the beginning. The Allies markedly so. Of course, bringing in the Soviet Union and America bumps those numbers up very quickly. You can kind of see when the Soviets came in, and then America comes in right after, and it's, yeah, it bumps up pretty quickly. So, all right, well, we're gonna probably have to put her down for the night here, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Of course, for you, it's going to be a blink of an eye, and we'll see if these brave, freedom-fighting nationalist Chinese forces under Chiang Kai-shek can hold on to the Japanese tide. Well, round 5 is in the books, and we're starting in South America here because those crazy Canucks have taken over everything you can take over without bugging the strict neutrals here, and the Brits. The Brits helped out a little bit. What do you say about that? Over here, America has started to clean everything out as it's heading west to go take care of the Japanese threat on the western border. And they decided they were going to build some bombers. They built 4 bombers and then a couple of transports and whatnot. And they've actually got 3 transports here out in the middle of the Atlantic, which can land in France next round. So we'll see what's up with that. The British had to come over here and eradicate all the German subs and whatnot. And the German subs were up here. As I don't know if you remember, there were 3 there last round. And they decided to sortie out. And they actually sank the Canadian destroyers that were there. And then the British had to come and kill this stuff so Canada could build a transport. And they sank the sub that was in there convoying, but the Russians are being convoyed now up there. So the Russian fleet sortied, of course, come take care of their own problems. The British have built a merchant marine here, and transports are getting ready to load up some of these guys and start hitting there. So the Germans are starting to feel a little bit of squeeze here, despite the good advancements they've made here into Russia. You'll see that there's not much left in the south. The Russians came down with everything they had and attacked western Ukraine, and all that's left is a lone Romanian fighter. So that was a good scrap. And the Germans have trouble making more stuff down here because they're not allowed to build factories here. So the closest factory they have is Stettin, and they had to upgrade that to a major. So bringing stuff over, which we always know is trouble for the Germans. But they've got a good stack of stuff here, just lone blockers. Looks like they've got about a dozen tanks, or not a dozen, about 10 tanks, and about a mixture of other units. It looks to be about 30 units or so. The Russians only have 10 at home, but they've got some adjacent, and they're going to have at least 1 turn to build. The Germans also have their Air Force up here, and you'll see that Leningrad has been taken, and they just absolutely put the boots to the Russians on that one. And the Russians lost their whole Air Force in that. Germans built another Tiger tank, so they've got 2 on the board now, which of course they attack at a 9, pretty nasty. But the Soviets replied in kind. They've got their KV-1s, and they also attack at a 9, and they're actually $1 cheaper than the Tigers. It's a little bit more reliable. Little historical point there. But the Russians had problems building what they wanted to this last round because they only had 2 factories for a total of 13 items, and they built mostly men, except for the 2 tanks, of course. So but their economy is shrinking a little bit. They did build over in Novosibirsk over here, built some units because the Japanese are creeping ever closer. In the Middle East, the British were able to take Syria from the Vichy. And in the Med, you'll notice that the Italian Navy is gone. And all that's left is a British tactical. They brought down their... they sortied everybody here, or sent everybody out, scrambled everybody, I guess, from Cairo out to attack the fleet that was here in 45. And they sank it, but they lost everything except for a lone tactical. So there's that, but you can see the British Navy is here with the Canadian Navy and the coastal battleship that they procured from Brazil. So thanks, Brazil. So the Italians have started to turtle a bit. They really can't build anything in the water now. The dream of an Italian Navy is pretty much kaput unless the Germans bring that big Air Force down from Finland. But we'll see. If the Germans can take Russia in the next couple turns, which odds are they will, then they can send everything south. So if Italy can hold on, which is what Italy is looking to do, as they've built a bunch of guys in Rome again. And they built 3 tanks here in Tobruk. They've got the fortress there as well, but the fortress is only good if you've got infantry in it. They've got 1, but they took back Cyrenaica here. And they also killed the last, oh, good grief, French Foreign Legion. I was trying to say Free French, but that wasn't it. So the French Foreign Legion troops are all gone now, all off the board. And the Italians can now roam around here and with their tank and grab a couple of free points here. of course, the Canadians have some transports down here, which might have something to say about that. We'll see. We'll see what happens there. Of course, the South Africans are doing their steady march up here after losing their transport to the Italian bomber. Over here, not a lot of stuff has changed in this area. Burma traded hands again, and that was pretty much it. Oh, Siam's got to put on the infantry. Yeah, Siam gets 1 infantry every round, so got to put that on there. The Siamese destroyer is out here, convoying for 2 here. And again, there's no answer for that for the Far East Command. They can't even get their planes out there because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and they don't have an air base and don't really want to sink money into an air base right now. I think they're willing to give up the 2, and then they also don't risk a fighter. Japanese continue to build and build and build. Hong Kong fell. Singapore fell. The Chinese retreated back to Sichuan because that's their big money province at $3. The communists are getting a little uppity though. They went and took a couple of Japanese territories and have a mild buffer between their big stack at Yan'an and the Japanese. Japanese have cleared out of everywhere though. They brought down guys from Vladivostok from that victory and put them into Peking, and now they're going to be heading west, no doubt. Let's see, what else? Oh yes, Anzac has decided to stretch its sea legs, as it were, and came out and took New Guinea as a freebie and adopted one of the Dutch soldiers as their own. The Japanese fleet, as we know, is up north, so just a lone sub here probably won't make an attempt to do anything there. The rest of the Anzac fleet, as you can see, came up here and they killed the Japanese destroyer and sent the rest of their guys up here because the Americans were coming around to deal with that monstrous Japanese fleet, and we'll see what happened there. And up here we have the Japanese are moving in. Looks like Hawaii is next on the menu, which of course is, you know, big points for America losing Hawaii and or Midway, so don't want to do that. There's still a Japanese sub convoying there and a Japanese sub convoying there, and there's a Japanese cruiser convoying up there. But as we look here, the rest of the Japanese fleet is gone and the Americans are here. Now this was one of the most lopsided attacks I have ever seen in this game. The Americans came in with what you see +1 sub. Now the first round, their subs both got hits. Sank an empty Japanese carrier because that defended the worst, and they didn't have a destroyer. The Japanese didn't, so probably a logistical problem for them there. And then out of the remaining 10 American boats, 8 got hits, and there was only 9 Japanese hits to be had. And then on the next turn, the Japanese only got 1 hit or 2 hits back, so they damaged the carrier and then sank a sub. But then this lone sub got a hit on the remaining Japanese battle wagon, and that was that. So they destroyed all the Japanese. No longer have any capital ships, and probably won't be building any anytime soon. And the Americans are now pretty much in control of their own coast. And they also have their friends, the Anzac, are going to be moving up north and causing some trouble. So we'll see if the Japanese hightail it out of here or if they come and take Hawaii. The Americans really are in no position to take back Hawaii or, as you can see here, Alaska. So it'll be interesting to see. But the Americans are moving across. They'll be able to kill all this stuff next turn. But that's next turn. And of course, if the dice don't like them, maybe they won't. And we'll see what the Japanese do. They might skedaddle too. So, all right. Well, that's the update of the units. And so we'll give you a look at the board here. And the board is getting kind of scary if you're an ally. There's the Axis. They're up to 214. That's a considerable jump. mainly thanks to the big incursion of the Germans, but also the Japanese took another 8, 10, 12, 14 this round, 12, something like that. So the Italians actually went up one, so everybody was pitching in. And then the Allies, of course, are losing that money. But they went down 16 bucks this round. As you can see from last round, they were 233, and now they're down to 217. So the convoying is a killer. They're losing lots of money to Convoy, and hopefully that'll end soon. They're actually losing 16 to Convoy. We forgot the Russian. We wrote it up there, but then we have. Oh, maybe not. No, it's 2, 4, 6. No, we're good. Okay. But I think the Americans are actually down 15, not 10. So we're going to have to take $5 away from the Yanks. All right. These things happen to anybody here that plays these games, you know. Sometimes you look at it and go, wait, something's wrong there. But as we know, the Americans are being convoyed for 5, 10, 15 bucks. All right, so that's got to be dealt with. So actually, they're at 212. So the Axis are now above the Allies for the first time since round 1, and only by a couple of bucks. But hey, could be the difference. But we'll see here, folks. It's kind of looking like the Allies have bounced back a little bit here, but the Axis are pretty healthy, and we'll see if. Well, if Italy can be neutered pretty good, then there's a good chance that Germany's going to have to turn around if they haven't captured Moscow. So we suspect they're going to go great guns, everything going for Moscow right now. And then we'll see if they can take it on the following round. But let's wait and see what round 6 has in store here in Global 1939. Okay, quick update here, folks. The Americans are actually in financial straits here. We're down to 63, minus 15 for the convoying, and plus they don't get their plus 20 bonus because they don't have San Francisco. So this is the actual number. The Axis are above by 10 bucks right now. So we'll see what happens, folks. Getting convoyed for 19, that hurts. All right, see you in a moment. All right, everybody. Well, this is what's been dead so far. This is the whole smear here, and that's a lot of dead stuff in one game, and we're not done yet, but we are done round 6. Oh, I haven't done the math yet. Give me just a second, I'll do the math. Okay, I have done the math, so we'll show that to you at the end of the round here. We're just going to start from the American seaboard here. You can see that ships have sailed and stuff is gone from the deep south and the Great Plains. Canadians have shipped off somewhere. Well, where'd everybody go? Well, here's where they are. They're all out here in England. The 4 bombers came out here. As you can see, the Germans decided to build a fleet of Unterseeboats. So we'll see how that works out. They also built a bunch of tanks here, and they flew a lot of their fighters and their bombers back here. And they also have a couple of fighters stationed in the Vichy territory here. So they're realizing there's going to be a 2-front war pretty soon, and we'll see what happens. Now, this looks very impressive here, but there are only 5 destroyers, and then there's 3 fighters. And the subs, when they attack, can't take planes as casualties, and the bombers and the aircraft can reach over to here. So this might all be gone next round, but we'll see how the German player decides to react to that. The Canadians have landed in Africa. There we go, kind of their own version of Operation Torch, called Operation Hockey Stick, and it was successful. And we got 2 minutes for slashing, but there you go. Moving along here, this is looking very empty because there is a bit of a fight as the British tried to take Tobruk and failed. They spent everything they had to get in there and failed, so Tobruk ended up with 3 tanks left, which have since moved to here. And then all the stuff that was in Cyrenaica has all moved to here. This tank was over in northern Algeria, and the Bersaglieri is moving across. So the Italians know that they got to go for Cairo now. Nothing was built in Cairo there, of course, because of the U-boat threat up north. But they do have that stack that is waddled all the way over from India. So there you go. And of course, the march continues up the yellow brick road here. All right. Over here, the Germans and the Russians are ready to go for it here. There were a couple of battles just to get everything into position, and the Russians actually thought about coming out here to Oral-Kursk and taking a shot at killing some tanks, but decided against it, as their infantry will be much better used defensively than offensively, and the reverse is the same for the Germans. Now, the Germans do have advanced infantry, the tech, so all their infantry attack at a 3 instead of a 2. Then they get the +1 from the artillery, so yeah, it could be a problem. But the Germans, who are so confident that they're going to take Moscow in this round, have begun moving everything south here to come support the Italians. And Yugoslavia is here, so we'll see if the Germans are going to perhaps maybe build a naval base there. But they can't build a factory here. In fact, they can't build a factory on the Med because they don't have any original territory on the Med. So that's the one hindrance in this version, is that the Germans can't just slap down a factory like they can in G40 and lend direct aid to the Italians that way. So this is a bit more arduous, but they can certainly stop Allied landings in the soft underbelly of Europe. Over here in India, India had quite the time here, so they've moved across because there's a bit of respite because the Japanese sent every plane and everything that could possibly go into Szechuan, and they took it, and they had 1 tank remaining. So the 4 divisions in Burma went up and killed the tank, lost a division, but were able to get the Burma road back open and get back the $3 for China. And the Chinese spent $12 on 4 infantry there. The communist Chinese continue to be annoying, and the Japanese are getting a little ticked at that. But the Japanese are able to put in some more troops. They have 1, 2, 3, 4 factories. So they can ostensibly put 12 units down each round on the mainland, which is going to far surpass what China can put down, both nationalist and communist combined. Anzac had some fun here. You can see there's not much left here. They kind of busted out, and they came out here and they flew some planes for support here, and they took Borneo, and they took Sumatra, which were both vacated by the Japanese. Now, of course, these 2 transports are dead, if not by the fleet, then by the air. But it also makes the Japanese turn around. And anytime you can get Japan turning around in this game, whenever I play against Japan, I'm a big believer in making them turn around. Because instead of them just then constantly marching forward, they've got to turn around and take care of these stupid little things that are bugging them. And I mean, even if this Siamese destroyer turns around and kills it, then the convoy goes away. So, you know, it's all good. You make Japan fight 4 or 5 different nations at the same time. The Japanese sub that was up here was sunk to great success. And up here, that destroyer and sub combo fleet with a transport was sunk. And unfortunately, for the Anzac, they lost all their destroyers. So any Japanese subs that may be lurking nearby are going to get a free shot in the coming battle. The Japanese, of course, took the Philippines and have a decent fleet there. Decent compared to anything else that's floating around. And they have 1 transport. And they also built a Yamato. You see that nice big shiny red battleship there. So the Yamato costs $24, so it's 20% more, but it also attacks much better. Attacks at 9 when it's healthy, and it can take up to 3 hits before it's sunk. So it can take 2 hits and still blast away. So hey, you know, that's very handy, especially in naval battles where there's usually not, you know, big huge stacks of infantry on the ground. There's not usually huge stacks of you know, naval equipment. You might have 10 or 12 destroyers stacked up with a couple of cruisers and a couple of battleships, but usually those 3-point ships, they can help decide things. Over here, the Japanese were able to take Hawaii. You may have remembered. They just brought in the lone transport, though, and then they skedaddled everybody down to here, which obviously wasn't safe enough. With America taking this last turn, they decided to stay here, and they're going to wait until they take San Fran back, but they were able to take everything else here. They lost a tank, unfortunately, in Southwest America here, but they were able to get rid of all the Japanese units, and there's none up in Alaska either. So pretty soon they're going to have everything liberated, and it'll all be great for them, but it might be too late. We're going to see. The cruiser that was here has come over here with the transport from Alaska and just dropped off the fellow into Kamchatka. That's pretty much the wrap up on everything there from round 6. I didn't write down the totals here. So let me write down the totals and then I'll do the math. Sorry, I forgot. I did all the countries, but I didn't do the totals. Just a moment. Alright, as promised, here's the board. And the Axis are doing fairly well. They got 212, which is a little less than last round because America is taking back the big chunks of Middle America. But if you see that, that's what Japan collected this round, the $107. They had $102 plus their 5 bonus. So that's going to be tough for the Allies to overcome, but we'll see. Italy's up a little bit. Germans are up a little bit. And if we look over here, the Allies, America again is still hurting. Needs taking back San Francisco is worth 8, so that'll put them up to 75. But they also lost Manila. They still are losing Alaska, and yeah, so it's kind of bad. I think they're actually at. I think they should be at 69. We'll check. They might be a couple more. China's down a little bit. Britain's down a little bit. Anzac's up because they captured the 2 money islands, but not sure if Anzac's the right country to have that money, but we'll see. Far East Command is down. Canada's up, but again, not a lot they can do with it, and South Africa remains. So right now it's 212 to 218. A little bit of glare going on there, eh? Where can we go here? There we go. So 212 to 218, and we'll see how that plays out here. I think the big story will be this fleet. If that fleet gets eradicated and if Moscow gets taken, the Allies players have said that they will pack it in. So we'll see what happens here on round 7 of Historical Board Gaming's Global War 1939. Well, folks, it is over. A commanding destruction of the Russians. The Germans lost about 10 of the 30 units they brought in there, and they didn't even kill all the infantry. And so any sort of meager attack, the Russians were thinking maybe if there was only a couple German units left, they could have taken them. That's just not going to happen. Just way too much armor there. And so over here, of course, this was never really in doubt. We had 7 U-boats and a bunch of aircraft, 7 or 8 aircraft that could make it, and all that the Allies could muster was 3 fighters and 5 destroyers, and the destroyers were killed. The 4 of them were killed on the very first round by the German subs, so it was all over. And so the Allies are packing it in, and some departing notes that we're going to share. One is that Japan attacking the States. We've seen it in the past while. Maybe we've seen it more, but I know there's 2 in recent memory where the Japanese have attacked and taken San Francisco, and the Axis have had resounding victories doing that. Now, obviously, it brings America into the war instantly, but when they've lost San Fran and they can't get it back for 3 rounds, this will be the 3rd round that they don't have it, because they lost it, they built in reaction, they moved once in reaction, this is the attack, and they're going to take it next turn. Then they have to build a factory, then they can build on it, and it's only a minor factory, unless, well, they could build a major in San Fran, and they could build another one in western U.S. right now, I suppose, like next turn. but it's about 5 or 6 rounds before they can actually start cranking out units. Meanwhile, there's nothing stopping the Japanese from just doing whatever they want in the Pacific. Now, we remember that the Americans left the Pacific, went off to the Atlantic where they killed Germany first, and that just opened up the door for Japan. Now, if the Americans don't actually leave, that doesn't mean that their coast is safe either, because the Japanese can use their sneak attack, and when they do a sneak attack, they can choose one sneak attack, and if they choose it against America here, then well, actually they get 3 sneak attacks actually, but if they use one of them against the fleet here, the first round the entire fleet doesn't get to shoot back, and then the next round they shoot back at a -2. So destroyers are shooting back at a 2 on a D12, cruisers are at a 4, battleships are at a 6, carriers are not even shooting back, I don't think, they might be at a 2. Subs don't shoot back. So it's pretty devastating stuff. So even if you do put your whole fleet here as America, and if Japan comes within range, it's a good idea to scatter your fleet, to make them use up those 3 attacks on different chunks, so they don't they can't just put everything they've got into the first attack, into one attack. But Japan never really got going on the land here, as they're wont to do actually in many versions. They unless you pour a bunch of stuff in, but also the Chinese had a monstrous stack of guys here, and communist China is healthy, considering communist China is rarely healthy, and they're actually heading over here to Manchuria. They won't make it, but yeah, it's pretty tough for Japan to get going in this game. There's just so many territories in China, and also the Chinese can get help from the UK once the hostilities have opened. And Japan just needs that money, right? They need that money to get into Asia, so they eventually do have to take on these folks. Now, remember in the rule book, taking Saigon or French Indochina brings the UK into the war. We didn't play that today. And sometimes we just choose not to, because it was a French colony and France has already fallen, and it's not like anybody cares. In the out of box, there's actually no units there as well, so they're just freebies for Japan. So that's how we tend to play it, except we put guys on there that if they become Vichy, they just instantly become Japanese units. So not much else to say here. Italy and Britain did their thing here, with Italy losing as they typically do, unless they can keep their fleet together, which they were unable to do very well today, and end up having to just build on the land. But hey, they ended up winning, being an Axis power. This was odd. Not sure it was had anything to do with losing the game. Coming down here, because they only took what did they take? One transport? I think they only took 1 transport, maybe 2 down here. That was it, and the rest they were able to pick up, and they ended up with a nice little fleet out of it. All right, got some nice stuff there. A couple of these transports are actually Canadian, but we swapped them out because we didn't have enough sculpts to build the new build over there. So, but that's pretty much it, folks. I think the U.S. being hampered and only collecting in the 40s and 50s, while they're actually at war, while Japan is collecting double that for a couple or 3 rounds in a row, really makes it tough on America. Takeaways from this, and I've always said this, is I really don't think America can abandon the Pacific, because then Japan will just come over, start the war, and just convoy to death, because there's 5 there, and then there's 5 there, and there's 5 there. And there's no way you're going to take back the Philippines or any of these islands, and you're not going to be able to help out your buddies who are getting convoyed to death. So don't recommend abandoning the Atlantic in this game. If you do, you better have Germany on the ropes really, really fast. And the German player building 7 subs last round was brilliant, because it shut down not only the attack there, but it was going to force then the British to pour money into just protecting its own fleet in future rounds. So had they not even won this battle, Britain would not be able to build ground units as much as they would have to build naval units. Because you know the German player, with subs being $5 a pop and Moscow falling, would be probably building 10 subs, if not 20 subs over here, just to get ridiculous and force the British to do crazy things. And of course, with the scramble rule, the German player can protect his subs from the meager British and American air forces in Europe at the time. So, yeah, overall, those are the takeaways. Don't abandon the Pacific if you're the Americans. And if you're Japan and you want to open up hostilities with the Americans, hey, it can absolutely work out for you. And it worked out very well for the Axis today. Calcutta, although a strong force in and of itself, really is pretty toothless. It's a plodding giant, and you know, it probably could come over here and end up taking Siam eventually, but you know that the Japanese will be building ships and coming around, and then for these guys to get back to help out Calcutta would be very difficult. Meanwhile, there's convoying going on here, there's another convoy zone here, there's another convoy zone here, and you know that they're all going to start getting convoyed by Japanese subs. So, all right, well, that's pretty much it. It's enough gabbing for me, and going to be heading into summer soon, and hopefully get some boys together and do another one of these, and yeah, that'll be a good time. But anyway, as I always say, take care, hug your loved ones, let your peeps know how awesome they are, how important they are, and as always, may those dice be with you.